Welcome to another edition of Black Men Screaming. My name is Maurice Carver. Today we discuss the issue of artificial intelligence and facial recognition. We opened that door, and now we have to deal with the consequences of the impact of these new technologies on our lives. Today we have Professor Ruha Benjamin speaking at the Digital Urbanism Conference and testimony at the New York City Council dealing with facial recognition and artificial intelligence.
Please join me in acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional and unceded territory of the Lenape. Let us also acknowledge the intertwined legacies, the devastation of transatlantic slavery and settler colonialism, which contribute to the creation and continued wealth of this university and the nation-state itself. We acknowledge the reparations owed to Black and Indigenous communities and nations and the impossibilities of return of generations past. Let's also acknowledge the ancestors in the room today as we fight together for better futures. We are alive at a time of greater mobilization to preserve this planet and all the beautiful creation that are no doubt worthy of the struggle. Ashe. So let me begin with 3 provocations, a kind of trailer for the talk, if you will. That way, if you get distracted or you start getting notifications on your phone or what have you, you'll at least know the 3 takeaways as I hope for them. First, racism is productive, not in the sense of being good, but in the literal capacity of racism to produce things, of value to some, even as it wreaks havoc on others. We're taught to think of racism as an aberration, a glitch, an accident, an isolated incident, a bad apple, in the backwoods, and outdated, rather than innovative, systemic, diffuse, an attached incident, the entire orchard, in the ivory tower, forward-looking, productive. In sociology, we like to say race is socially constructed, but we often fail to state the corollary that racism constructs. Secondly, I'd like us to remember, think about the way that race and technology shape one another. More and more people are accustomed to thinking about the ethical and social impact of technology, but as we know, this is only half of the story. Social values, norms, structures, all exist prior to any tech development. So it's not simply the impact of technology, but the social inputs that make some inventions appear inevitable and desirable. Which leads to a third provocation, that imagination is a contested field of action, not an ephemeral afterthought that we have the luxury to dismiss or romanticize, but a resource, a battleground, an input and output of technology and social order. In fact, we should acknowledge that most people are forced to live inside someone else's imagination. And one of the things we have to come to grips with is how the nightmares that many people are forced to endure are the underside of elite fantasies about efficiency, profit, social control, and even beautiful design. Racism, among other axes of domination, helps to produce this fragmented imagination, monopoly for some, misery for others. This means that for those of us who want to construct a different social reality, one grounded in justice and joy, we can't only critique the underside, but we also have to wrestle with the deep investments, the desire even, for social domination. So that's the trailer.
Today we will focus on the use of facial recognition technology and biometric data collection in business and residences in New York City. The hearing will also focus on the following 3 bills. Intro 1170, sponsored by Councilmember Torres, would require businesses to notify customers of the use of biometric identifying technology. Intro 1672, sponsored by Councilmember Richards, would require real property owners to submit registration statements regarding biometric recognition technology utilized on the premises. Preconsidered intro, the numbers pending, sponsored by Councilmember Lander, would define the term key in the New York City Building Code and require building owners to provide keys to residential tenants. New York City has seen an increased use of facial recognition technology in residential buildings and businesses. This game-changing technology has the ability to improve security yet affects privacy. Unlike other biometric identifiers like fingerprints, facial recognition technology can operate at a distance and without anyone's knowledge or consent. In New York City, cameras are everywhere, as we know, in retail stores, restaurants, on street corners, attached to buildings or vehicles, and more. In the private sector, facial recognition technology can identify customers, prevent shoplifting, and strengthen security, among others. However, there is little or no knowledge of how data generated from facial recognition technology is collected, stored, and shared. With this technology, there is a potential for data breaches that could result in grave consequences for those affected. After all, if a password gets hacked, it can easily be changed. However, one's face is unique and irreplaceable. Today, we will focus on the implementation of facial recognition technology in the private sector and how to balance the benefits of this technology. Even with strengthened security and improved consumer experiences, the risk of data breaches and invasions of privacy pose serious concerns. We look forward to gaining a better understanding of facial recognition technology and its uses in our city. We hope to work together with the administration in mitigating any negative impacts on our communities and finding solutions.
At STOP, we're quite concerned about how biometric surveillance empowers landlords to harass tenants, not merely by tracking every single action they take near the building or in building hallways, but there's emerging forms of artificial intelligence software called gate detection and other products that try to predict what our mood is. They try to say, is someone happy? Are they sad? Are they depressed? And that's another level of intrusive surveillance that landlords will be able to deploy unless we stop it here and now. And you can easily imagine the situation in which landlords try to predict who's going to be a, quote, good tenant based off of these sorts of highly invasive forms of AI and trying to micromanage every part of our activity. And we've already heard horror stories of people receiving fines and warnings for their activities in their own buildings because of these systems.
Toward that end, initiatives like Data for Black Lives and the Detroit Community Tech Project offer an even more expansive approach. The former brings together people working across a number of agencies and organizations in a proactive approach to tech justice, especially at the policy level. And the latter develops and uses technology rooted in community needs, offering support to grassroots networks doing data justice research, including Discotex, which stands for Discovering Technology, which are multimedia mobile neighborhood workshop fairs that can be adapted in other locales. And I'll just mention one of the concrete collaborations that's grown out of Data for Black Lives. A few years ago, several government agencies in St. Paul, Minnesota, including the police department and the public school system, formed a controversial joint powers agreement called the, quote, Innovation Project, giving these agencies broad discretion to collect and share data on young people with the goal of developing predictive tools to identify at-risk youth in the city. There was immediate and broad-based backlash from the community, and in 2017, a group of over 20 local organizations formed what they called the Stop the Cradle to Prison Algorithm Coalition. Data for Black Lives has been providing various forms of support to this coalition, and eventually the city of St. Paul dissolved the agreement in favor of what they call a more community-based approach, which was a huge victory for the activists and community members who'd been fighting these policies for over a year. Another abolitionist approach to the new Jim Code is the Our Data Body's Digital Defense Playbook, which introduces a set of tools for diagnosing, dealing with and healing the injustices of pervasive and punitive data collection and data-driven systems. The playbook contains in-depth guidelines for facilitating workshops and group activities, plus tools, tip sheets, reflection pieces, and rich stories crafted from in-depth interviews with communities in Charlotte, Detroit, and LA, with the aim of engendering power, not paranoia, when it comes to technology. The fact is, data disenfranchisement and domination has always been met with resistance and appropriation, in which activists, scholars, and artists have sharpened abolitionist tools that employ data for liberation. This is a tradition in which, as Du Bois exclaimed, one could not be a calm, cool, detached scientist while Negroes were lynched, murdered, and starved. From his modernist data visualizations on your left to Ida B. Wells Barnett's expert deployment of statistics in the Red Record, there's a long tradition of employing and challenging data for Black lives. Towards that end, the late legal and critical race scholar, Derek A. Bell, encouraged a radical assessment of reality through creative methods and racial reversals, insisting that to see things as they really are, you must imagine them for what they might be, which is why I think that the arts and humanities are so vital to this discussion and movement. One of my favorite examples of a racial reversal in the Bellian tradition is this parody project that begins by subverting the anti-Black logics embedded in new high-tech approaches to crime prevention. Instead of using predictive policing techniques to forecast street crime, the white-collar early warning system flips the script by creating a heat map that flags city blocks where financial crimes are likely to occur. The system not only brings the hidden but no less deadly crimes of capitalism into view, but includes an app that alerts users when they enter high-risk areas to encourage citizen policing and awareness. Taking it one step further, the development team is working on a facial recognition program to flag individuals who are likely perpetrators. And the training set used to design the algorithm includes the profile photos of 7,000 corporate executives downloaded from LinkedIn. Not surprisingly, the average face of a criminal is white and male. To be sure, creative exercises like this are only comical when we ignore that all of its features are drawn directly from actually existing proposals and practices in the real world, including the use of facial images to predict criminality. By deliberately and inventively upsetting the status quo in this manner, analysts can better understand and expose the many forms of discrimination embedded in and enabled by technology.